Welcome back to this edition of Trading Bits and Bytes. I'm Susan Littlefield. We are at Husker Harvest Days, and it was a great 3-day show. Of course, the day all wrapped up with the craziness of a WASDE report, and that's kind of where we're going to start looking. Mike Suzzalo is joining us today with Global Commodity Analytics, and thanks so much for taking the trip from Kansas to join us here at Husker Harvest Days the last day and a half.
It's been a farm show week, Susan, starting out at Big Iron and coming down to my friends at Rural Radio Network and hanging out with them for a day and a half to 2 days. It's been a great week.
Let's talk about the craziness of this WASDE report that came out on Thursday. We know the report at 11 o'clock. Everybody, our booth filled as people watched those monitors and how fast corn went down and beans went up.
Yeah, and this was all predicated around, or a lot of it was anyway, not just the frictions that we've had with the trade negotiations between the Chinese and the United States and the USMCA and the question mark about the new ethanol demand policy, but really at the heart of this, it was really predicated upon the idea this market has got an issue when it comes to the supply side, and the market was just, quite frankly, scared and afraid of what USDA may bring us on this report because of what they did in August. And I think when you saw the private yield estimates come out, roughly a half a dozen in a week and a half time period heading into this report, it was just a lot of nerves and a lot of fear that we would be set up for another leg down. And I think that's how Chicago was looking at it until the beginning of this week.
And when those numbers first came out, obviously, and I reiterate this for a reason, those initial trades were not human trades. Those were computer analytic moving through those numbers.
Yeah, the algorithmic trading platforms are by far in the market within milliseconds after the data is released, and it's actually faster than we can even think about in human terms. And so you really do have to give the market not just a daily close, but even a weekly close. And that's kind of the things that I've changed up in my analysis when I project prices with clients. I really want Friday's close, the weekly close, to be every bit as strong as what we saw on Thursday. And it's really worth noting, wheat didn't get much of a great report number. It was a neutral report, I would call it. But guess what? Wheat's at a 1-month high right now heading into Friday's close. That's a big number to me, and it's something I want to really watch.
Well, wheat got hardly any attention in the Thursday discussions.
And that's, I think, mainly because of the fact that we do have a billion bushel carryover in the United States. The stocks-to-use ratios are about flat right now versus the last 2 or 3 years. The big thing the wheat's been trading is the outside markets and the dollar. The relationship between the wheat and the soft red wheat and the U.S. dollar is nearly a negative 100% on a 10-week basis. So when you see the dollar go up, the wheat's going to go down at this point because of the funds and how they trade. So the big key now going forward is, can we get a sell signal in the dollar and take a lot of pressure off the wheat and kind of let the corn trade its own fundamentals, meaning maybe a little bit less yield, maybe a little bit lighter harvested acres, and a world stocks-to-use number that's 4% less than last year.
Well, speaking of corn, is it going to continue to chase the beans?
I think it will. I think the USDA set us up for that in the bullish August report when they cut the carryover substantially. On Thursday's report, September report, USDA went ahead, cut demand a little bit on the corn, but raised the bean demand a little bit while cutting yield on both. So ending stocks essentially went down again in the soybeans to the point where we're now trading closer to, I think, a market mindset of a sub 600 million bushel carryover at this stage, even though USDA is a little bit over that. But the demand is coming on for the soybeans. We see it in the exports. I think the USDA supported the idea, keep buying beans and selling corn, especially if this weather turns cold in the next 10 days.
What are we going to see from a global input on all of this?
The global input comes from not just the dollar and how the funds may switch to being more supportive of the ag commodities, but what do the global end users do now? Because, again, I have to reiterate, a lot of people that I spoke with, a lot of colleagues in Chicago that have a strong sense of the global markets as far as end user cash bushels, they were buying this week, and that was part of the reason why was that they started to see a change in demand sentiment. One large commercial came in and bought 1 billion bushels, is my understanding, on the close. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the kind of numbers that we're talking about. Will the global end user now start to buy out a little bit instead of hand to mouth?
I want to switch gears a little bit and look at the livestock, because as we look at the WASDE report, how does this affect a livestock producer?
Well, it kind of goes back to your last question, whether it's 1 million bushels that the commercial end user bought or 1 billion bushels. We don't know which it is, but the point is they're starting to buy again. So if you've been sitting on your hands and been right, maybe it's time to start looking at it, especially from a soy meal perspective, because we do think that the African swine fever has gotten to a point where China is trying to repopulate their hog herd now, so that helps. Brazil's soybean excesses are a little bit lower. They still got a few million tons to sell, but nothing close to what they had 3 months ago. So I think in both the corn and especially the meal markets, you do want to extend yourself out here because you've been right by waiting.
All right, sounds good. Thanks so much. Mike Zuzolo has been joining us here from the Husker Harvest Days. It's this week's edition of Trading Bits and Bytes.